Emma had always walked home the same way, through the quiet alleys of Liverpool she knew so well. But on that October night, she wasn't alone. Someone had been watching her, waiting. Mark, a man no one suspected, had studied the city like a map of opportunity, and what happened next would terrorize the entire city. This is the story of Liverpool as Alleyway Predator, how a hidden monster moved unseen for months, and how police finally brought him to justice. Liverpool's nightlife thrived on music, laughter, and neon lights. Crowds spilled onto streets as clubs closed, taxis honked, and late-night cafes offered refuge to those who wandered the city's corners. Yet just a few steps away from the bustling main streets, narrow alleys wound between brick buildings, hidden from the glow of streetlights. These paths were often overlooked, considered safe only by the absence of trouble, or so people thought. On one cold October evening, the illusion of safety shattered. A young woman, returning from a night out with friends, had chosen one of these shortcuts. She moved quickly, her heels clicking against the cobblestones, ears straining for any sign of someone behind her. The shadows seemed deeper than usual, stretching across the walls as if they were alive. She felt the sudden, chilling sensation of being watched, but when she turned, the alley appeared empty. Minutes later, she was attacked. The assault was swift, brutal, and calculated. She fought, but the assailant overpowered her, leaving her bruised and terrified. When she regained consciousness in the street, trembling and bleeding, she could barely remember what had happened. The only thing that lingered in her mind was the shadowy presence that had followed her before the attack, a figure she could not clearly identify. Police arrived quickly, taking her statement and examining the scene. The alley, narrow and dark, offered few clues. There were no fingerprints, no clear footprints, nothing that could reveal the identity of the person who had vanished like a ghost. A nearby CCTV camera had recorded only a brief, blurry figure slipping out of frame, leaving more questions than answers. For the detectives, it was frustrating the evidence was minimal, the suspect's movements precise and deliberate. As the investigation began, officers realized this was not an ordinary street crime. The choice of location suggested the perpetrator knew the alleys well, navigating through them with confidence. He had planned the attack carefully, using the cover of darkness and the city's hidden corners to avoid detection. Even the victim's survival had been a gamble, and her testimony provided only fragments. The sense of being followed, the fleeting glimpses of movement, the sound of hurried footsteps fading into the distance. The attack sent ripples through the community. People who had once walked home alone late at night suddenly avoided shortcuts, opting for busy streets and taxi rides. Rumors spread quickly, each retelling amplifying the fear. Local shops reported a noticeable drop in foot traffic, and streetlights were scrutinized for gaps in coverage. Social media buzzed with speculation, while police urged the public to stay vigilant. Despite the heightened concern, there was an eerie sense that the perpetrator remained invisible, slipping past even the most watchful eyes. Detectives returned to the alley repeatedly, tracing each brick, each shadow, searching for the smallest clue. They examined the ground for overlooked footprints, the walls for marks, the edges of trash bins for any trace of DNA. The neighborhood watched silently as the investigation unfolded. It became clear that whoever had committed this attack was not only cunning but patient, waiting for the right moment, choosing victims with care, and disappearing without leaving a trail. That first assault marked the beginning of a nightmare that would soon grip Liverpool. It revealed the presence of a hidden predator, a figure who had studied the city's shadows and learned to move among them undetected. For the police, it was the start of a long and painstaking hunt. For the citizens, it was the loss of innocence, the understanding that danger sometimes lurks in places no one imagines, waiting quietly for its moment to strike. Within weeks of the first attack, a chilling pattern began to emerge. Liverpool police were confronted with reports of additional assaults, each strikingly similar to the first. The victims were all young women, all walking alone at night, all attacked in narrow alleyways, tucked away from the city's main streets. Each crime scene bore the same eerie signature. Nothing stolen, no clear evidence left behind, and the attacker vanished without a trace. It became obvious that these were not random incidents. Someone was carefully selecting victims and locations, moving through the city with precision and purpose. Detectives started mapping the attacks, plotting each alleyway on a city grid. At first glance, the locations seemed scattered, but closer examination revealed subtle connections. The alleys were all part of a network that twisted through the heart of Liverpool, linking the bustling nightlife districts to quieter residential streets. They shared characteristics: poor lighting, blind spots beyond the reach of surveillance cameras, and narrow passages where a predator could strike and disappear before anyone noticed. Whoever was behind these crimes had a deep understanding of the city's hidden paths, an intimate knowledge that allowed them to strike repeatedly without being caught. As the cases multiplied, the city's sense of security began to crumble. Women avoided familiar shortcuts, opting instead for longer, busier routes. Families began walking together at night, and friends developed strict routines of checking in on each other. The fear spread quickly, infiltrating everyday life. Police urged caution and increased patrols, but the attacker seemed to anticipate their presence. Every time officers moved in a particular area, the perpetrator would vanish, leaving only shadows and silence behind. It was as if he had studied not just the streets, but the movements of those sworn to catch him. Investigators grew increasingly concerned. They examined CCTV footage from nearby businesses, street cameras, and even private residences. Some videos captured fleeting glimpses of movement, a figure darting across the frame or standing in the shadows, just beyond recognition. None of the images were clear enough to identify the suspect, but they offered subtle clues. The shape of his body, the way he walked, even the rhythm of his steps. Forensic teams scoured each alleyway for any trace of evidence, yet the predator left nothing obvious behind. The emerging pattern suggested something more disturbing. The attacks were deliberate, almost ritualistic. Each assault followed the same general timeline, occurring during the late hours, when streets were quiet but not completely deserted. The perpetrator chose locations that allowed for rapid escape, often leading into areas that police assumed were too remote for someone to use successfully. It was as though he was testing the city, learning its weak points, and gaining confidence with each successful attack. As the investigation deepened, detectives realized that the first assault had only been the beginning. The pattern indicated that this predator was emboldened, studying the city meticulously, observing his victims, and exploiting every opportunity. Liverpool was no longer just a city with crime. It had become a hunting ground. The police understood they were dealing with someone far more calculated and dangerous than they had imagined. A shadow moving silently through the alleys, leaving fear and confusion in his wake. The city waited anxiously for the next move, uncertain if anyone would be able to stop the predator before more women were caught in his calculated trap. Every alleyway felt like a potential threat, every shadow a possible danger. Liverpool was slowly being gripped by an invisible hand, one that no one could see, but everyone could feel. And the hunt for the hidden monster was only just beginning. The fear that had begun to take hold after the initial attacks spread rapidly throughout Liverpool. What had started as isolated incidents quickly escalated into a citywide anxiety, seeping into the routines of ordinary life. People began to question the safety of streets they had walked for years without concern. Alleyways, once seen as convenient shortcuts, became symbols of danger. Residents no longer felt comfortable venturing out alone after dark. Even familiar neighborhoods, where friends and families had always walked without thought, felt threatening and unfamiliar. Local news stations covered each new attack with increasing urgency. Images of the city's narrow alleys and darkened streets filled broadcasts, alongside warnings for women to remain vigilant. Social media amplified the fear, with posts and comments speculating on the identity of the attacker and his methods. Rumors circulated about someone who studied his victims for days, following their habits before choosing the perfect moment to strike. Every new account added to the sense that the predator was methodical, calculating, and always one step ahead of the authorities. The police increased patrols in areas that had previously been quiet and unmonitored. Officers walked the streets in pairs, checking alleys and monitoring CCTV feeds from every angle they could. Yet despite these efforts, the attacker seemed to vanish whenever law enforcement was present. The feeling of being hunted extended to both citizens and officers alike. Residents reported seeing shadows in alleyways and fleeting figures just beyond the reach of streetlights, heightening tension and mistrust. Even the most vigilant pedestrians could not shake the sensation of being watched. Investigators began to realize that the attacks were not random, but highly selective. Patterns emerged that hinted at careful planning. Each victim walked alone. Each attack occurred during predictable late-night hours, and each alley was chosen for its isolation and lack of immediate escape routes. It became clear that the perpetrator understood the city's hidden geography better than anyone else, exploiting routes that allowed him to enter and exit undetected. This understanding made him elusive, a figure that the public could sense but never see clearly. The city itself seemed to respond to the growing terror. Shops closed earlier than usual, streets emptied faster, and late-night traffic slowed as people hesitated to drive through certain areas. Communities organized informal safety networks, sharing advice on which streets were safe and which should be avoided. Friends called each other regularly, checking on movements and reporting suspicious behavior. The predator, however, remained invisible, moving through the city's veins while the population adapted around him. Behind the scenes, detectives pored over maps, CCTV footage, and police reports, searching for a link that could break the case open. The attacks were connected not by fingerprints or physical evidence, but by something more subtle, a pattern of control, timing, and geography that pointed to a predator who was patient and meticulous. Each new assault confirmed their theory. The attacker was studying the city and its people, learning from each encounter and becoming more confident in his ability to strike. By the end of the month, the city's anxiety had reached a peak. Liverpool's streets were no longer just pathways, but potential traps, each alleyway a possible stage for the next attack. The fear was palpable, a collective tension that made the predator feel omnipresent. Residents whispered about shadows and footsteps, and the knowledge that he could strike at any moment haunted the city. Liverpool had entered a state of hypervigilance, and the predator continued to move through its hidden corridors, unseen and unstoppable, leaving a community gripped by terror and uncertainty. The first real breakthrough came unexpectedly, from a source that initially seemed insignificant. A small corner shop, tucked away on a quiet street near one of the recent attack sites, had installed a basic security camera to monitor its doorway. The owner rarely checked the footage, assuming it was only useful for petty theft or shoplifting. But when detectives requested every available recording in the area, that camera suddenly became crucial. The review of the tapes revealed something that would change the direction of the investigation. A man walking past the shop at the exact moment one of the assaults occurred. The footage was grainy, the figure blurred and lacking clear facial features, yet there were details that stood out. The man moved with a distinctive rhythm, dragging one foot slightly as he walked. His pace was steady, almost methodical, as if he had practiced walking that path countless times before. This single detail became the key to understanding the predator's behavior. Forensic analysts compared it to footprints discovered at another crime scene. The arches, the pressure points, even the subtle drag of a shoe matched the movement captured on the tape. While it was not enough to confirm his identity definitively, it gave detectives their first tangible lead. A discovery changed the investigators' perspective entirely. It confirmed that the attacks were deliberate and organized, carried out by someone with knowledge of both the city as hidden alleyways and its patterns of activity. This was not a spontaneous predator acting on impulse. It was someone who studied his environment, planned his movements, and exploited the small blind spots that most people ignored. Police began focusing on individuals who lived or worked nearby, those who would be familiar with the alleys and the surrounding streets. Officers began conducting covert surveillance on residents who might fit the profile, observing routines, noting unusual behavior, and watching for signs of obsession with late-night streets. Every day, they checked CCTV footage, searched through city maps, and analyzed the timing and patterns of the attacks. They mapped the routes, noting how each alley connected to another, forming a network that the predator used to move quickly and efficiently. The city itself had become a labyrinth, one the attacker navigated with ease, while everyone else struggled to understand his path. The detectives also began studying the psychology of the predator. His careful movements and precise timing suggested patience, an ability to plan ahead, and a comfort with watching people without being noticed. It was chilling to realize that someone could walk the city unnoticed while plotting attacks so meticulously. The thought that he might have been observing residents for weeks or even months before striking sent shivers through the investigative team. As the weeks passed, the small clue from the shop camera became the foundation of the investigation. It provided a starting point, a thread that could be pulled to unravel the predator's network of movements. Detectives reviewed every angle, examined the alleys repeatedly, and coordinated patrols around the predicted routes. The breakthrough also gave the public a fragile sense of hope-proof that the predator could be caught if police were vigilant and methodical. For the first time, there was a sense that the hunt for the predator might succeed. The camera had captured more than a shadow. It had revealed a rhythm, a signature, and a pattern that connected the attacks. Liverpool, though still gripped by fear, now had a pathway to justice. The predator was no longer entirely invisible. He had left a trace, subtle yet undeniable, and detectives were ready to follow it wherever it led. As detectives studied the small clue captured on the shop camera, a larger picture began to emerge. By analyzing all the attacks, it became clear that the predator was not just familiar with one part of the city, but had an intimate knowledge of Liverpool's hidden alleys, backstreets, and shortcuts. Each assault seemed to follow a pattern, a route only someone living close by could navigate with such ease. Police began to focus on a specific neighborhood where the alleys connected in ways that perfectly matched the paths the attacker had used. Covert surveillance operations began in the area. Plainclothes officers were stationed at key intersections and hidden vantage points, observing residents whose behavior appeared unusual or secretive. For days, nothing seemed to stand out. People walked to work, children played in quiet streets, and life went on under the weight of fear. But detectives knew the predator had to live somewhere near the network of alleyways he exploited, and patience became their most important tool. Then, one man drew attention. He had a routine that subtly differed from everyone else's. He worked night shifts, which explained why he was often seen moving in the dark. He returned home using narrow paths rather than the main streets, and his movements were careful, almost deliberate, as though he avoided being noticed. Neighbors described him as quiet and withdrawn, someone who kept to himself, rarely interacting with anyone in the area. Officers observed him over several nights, noting that he followed a consistent pattern, leaving his home, walking through the alleys, and returning after long intervals. It was the rhythm of someone who understood the city in ways ordinary residents did not. Investigators also began to review public records, matching his schedule against the timing of the attacks. The overlap was striking. On nights when assaults occurred, his movements aligned perfectly with the locations and timing of the crimes. Every step he took, every path he chose, suggested familiarity with the city's hidden corridors. Detectives realized that they were watching someone who had been planning these attacks for a long time, someone who had studied not only the geography, but the behavior of potential victims. A surveillance team observed him closely, documenting his routines and noting small details. The way he glanced over his shoulder, the precise timing of his steps, and his habit of pausing near intersections as if assessing his surroundings. Even without direct evidence, police began to feel the weight of certainty. They were looking at the predator in plain sight, a man who had hidden in the shadows of ordinary life while orchestrating a series of calculated assaults. The challenge, however, was to catch him without alerting him. Any sudden move could drive him further underground, making him even harder to find. The team coordinated carefully, combining observation, patrols, and ongoing analysis of CCTV footage to predict his next moves. Each night of watching added to the psychological picture of the predator, revealing his methodical, patient nature and his ability to vanish from sight. As the days passed, detectives felt they were closing in. The man's familiarity with the city and his meticulous planning were no longer just signs of danger. They were clues pointing to a trap that could finally bring the attacks to an end. Liverpool had been living in fear, but now, armed with observation, analysis, and a growing understanding of the predator, the police prepared to move from watching to action. The hunt that had begun with shadows in an alley was reaching a critical turning point, and the city waited anxiously to see if the monster hiding in plain sight could finally be stopped. With a prime suspect identified, Liverpool police began planning an operation that required precision, patience, and discretion. They understood that any mistake could alert the predator, sending him deeper into the city's labyrinth of alleys and making him impossible to track. The team devised a strategy that combined undercover surveillance with careful observation from hidden vantage points. Officers posed as pedestrians, moving along predictable routes the predator was likely to use. Every alley, every side street, every blind corner became part of a meticulously calculated plan to catch him in action. For nights, the operation appeared to yield nothing. The suspect followed his usual routines, slipping through the alleys with his characteristic rhythm, yet avoiding any interaction with potential victims. Officers followed at a distance, careful not to reveal themselves. The frustration was palpable. It seemed the predator was aware, somehow sensing the presence of the police, even without visible confirmation. Detectives knew that if they acted too soon, he could vanish entirely, and the attacks would continue. The tension grew with each hour, every alley holding the potential for confrontation or failure. Then, one cold weekend, a breakthrough came. The suspect deviated slightly from his routine, leaving home earlier than usual and heading into a cluster of backstreets that had been used in previous assaults. The team immediately mobilized, ensuring officers were positioned along potential escape routes, while undercover personnel followed silently. Every movement was calculated. There could be no hesitation. The predator's knowledge of the streets was formidable, but now the police were turning his strength into a vulnerability by anticipating his path and cutting off exits. The operation required extreme patience. Officers watched as he moved through the narrow lanes, pausing at intersections, glancing over his shoulder, seemingly unaware of the net closing around him. Each step he took confirmed what detectives had long suspected. He was bold, methodical, and completely confident in his ability to navigate the city undetected. But the police had anticipated his tactics, using the city's own layout against him. Every alley he passed through was monitored, every potential escape route covered. The predator, skilled at disappearing into shadows, was slowly being funneled toward an unavoidable confrontation. The turning point came when he began following a woman, walking alone, moving closer with the same calculated caution he had used in every previous attack. An undercover officer, stationed strategically, signaled the team. In that instant, the operation shifted from surveillance to action. Officers converged silently, cutting off paths and closing in from multiple directions. The predator attempted to evade capture, weaving through alleys and backstreets, but every exit had been anticipated. There was no place left to run. When he was finally apprehended, the relief among the officers was profound, tempered by the knowledge of what could have happened had their timing been off. Evidence from previous crime scenes, including clothing and footwear, matched what he had been wearing during the operation. For the first time, the city could see that the predator who had haunted its alleys for months was no longer untouchable. The careful planning, the patience of the police, and the use of the city's geography had finally led to the moment that Liverpool had been waiting for. The predator was caught in the act. After weeks of observation, planning, and patient waiting, police knew the predator was active again. The city's backstreets, usually empty at this hour, became a stage for a confrontation that had been building for months. Officers positioned themselves strategically, covering every narrow alley, each potential escape route, and every side street that the suspect might use. The operation relied on timing, precision, and the careful coordination of every officer involved. One mistake could allow him to disappear forever into Liverpool's shadows. The suspect moved with the same calculated rhythm that had been observed countless times before. He slipped through the alleys, glancing over his shoulder, pausing momentarily at intersections, and seemingly assessing his surroundings with methodical care. Each step, each subtle movement, confirmed the meticulous nature of his planning. Detectives knew this was the moment they had been waiting for. It was the chance to stop him in the act, to end the terror he had inflicted on the city. An undercover officer, blending seamlessly into the street, followed him closely. The predator had not noticed the presence of law enforcement, confident in his ability to strike and vanish. As he drew nearer to the woman, the officer signaled the waiting team. In a carefully orchestrated move, officers converged, blocking every exit and narrowing the options for escape. The predator, sensing the encroaching presence of multiple people, tried to flee, weaving through alleys, ducking behind walls, and attempting to use the familiar geography to his advantage. But the police had anticipated his movements. Every potential route had been covered, every alley monitored. He was trapped in a web of his own making, navigating streets he had once used with impunity. The chase was tense but brief. The predator's confidence turned to panic as the exits disappeared. Cornered in a small, dimly lit passageway, he could no longer escape. Officers moved in, surrounding him from multiple directions. When he was apprehended, there was a mix of relief and disbelief. The man who had terrorized Liverpool, moving unseen through its streets, had been caught in the act, unable to continue his reign of fear. His clothing, footwear, and physical traits matched evidence collected from previous crime scenes, finally linking him definitively to the string of attacks that had gripped the city for months. In the aftermath of the arrest, detectives examined the location where he had been caught. A narrow passageway, once a conduit for terror, now symbolized the precision of the police operation and the vulnerability of the predator. Evidence recovered from his clothing, combined with prior forensic analysis, confirmed his role in the assaults. For the first time, the public could feel a sense of safety returning to the city streets. Liverpool, which had been shrouded in fear, began to breathe again. The capture demonstrated the effectiveness of careful planning, patient observation, and relentless pursuit. The predator, once an invisible presence haunting alleyways, was now firmly in police custody. The city could finally begin to heal from the months of uncertainty, knowing that the shadow that had stalked its streets had been brought into the light. The chase was over, but the impact of the fear he had created would linger, a stark reminder of the dangers that can hide in plain sight. After the arrest of the predator, Liverpool police began a detailed search of his residence, determined to uncover every piece of evidence that could explain the full extent of his crimes. Inside his flat, they discovered a hidden room, carefully concealed behind a false wall. The space was small, dimly lit, and meticulously organized. Maps of the city's alleys and backstreets were pinned to the walls, each marked with dates, routes, and notes. Every path the predator had taken during his attacks was charted in detail, revealing a chilling level of planning and obsession. The hidden room was more than a storage space. It was a command center, a place where he had studied the city like a hunter preparing for a series of strikes. The discovery sent shockwaves through the investigative team. Items collected in the room included photographs of alleyways, handwritten schedules, and lists of potential victims, some of whom had already been attacked. Forensic analysis linked fibers and materials from the hidden room to clothing and items recovered from previous crime scenes. DNA evidence further confirmed his involvement, leaving no doubt that he was the source of months of fear gripping Liverpool. Each piece of evidence revealed the predator's methodical mind, his patience, and his ability to hide in plain sight while meticulously planning assaults that had seemed random to outsiders. Detectives realized that what had made him so elusive was not just knowledge of the city as streets, but an understanding of human behavior. He observed, he waited, and he exploited routines. He had learned how people moved through the city at night, which streets were most often empty, and how long it would take officers to respond in different areas. His study of the city and its residents made him almost invisible, a shadow in the urban landscape. The hidden room made that terrifying reality clear. He had not acted impulsively. Every movement, every attack, was calculated and deliberate. The arrest and subsequent discoveries brought relief to the city, but it also left residents grappling with a deeper unease. The man who had terrorized them seemed ordinary in public, blending seamlessly into everyday life while committing horrific acts in secret. The knowledge that someone so close, so familiar, had been capable of such violence challenged the sense of safety people had long taken for granted. Parents became more protective, communities organized more vigilant patrols, and late-night streets slowly filled again, but always under the shadow of caution. Court proceedings followed, presenting the wealth of evidence gathered from the hidden room and the forensic connections to previous crimes. The case became a defining moment in Liverpool's history, highlighting both the dangers that can hide beneath everyday life and the determination of law enforcement to pursue justice relentlessly. The predator was sentenced, ensuring he could no longer strike fear into the city's residents. The investigation closed with a sense of finality, but it left lasting lessons. The hidden room symbolized the predator's meticulous planning, while the relentless work of police demonstrated that patience, observation, and careful strategy could prevail over even the most calculating criminal. Liverpool began to recover, its streets slowly regaining life, but the memory of the predator remained as a reminder that danger can lurk unseen, and vigilance is often the first line of protection. The city had faced its darkest shadow, and through courage and determination, had finally brought it to light.